Hi, my name is Katie Hendrickson. Currently, I teach 7th grade math at Athens Middle School. And for the past 3 years, I've hosted an intern in my classroom. Now, over the past 2 years, these interns have been part of the clinical year-long or two-quarter-long program, and they've been in the co-teaching program as well. So I'm going to talk about 6 co-teaching strategies that we used and the sequence in which the intern and I used them. So these strategies are: one teach, one observe, one teach, one assist, alternative teaching, parallel teaching, station teaching, and team teaching. So the first strategy that we used was one teach, one observe. This is typically the starting point for many professional internships, and we used it really in just the first couple of days to really ease my intern into the classroom. For this method, typically the co-teachers will decide to collect a specific type of data. They'll determine the method for collecting the data, and then together they'll analyze the data after the lesson has been taught. We did it a little less formally. For example, in those first couple of days, I would share my lessons with the intern ahead of time, explain my planning, what I was going to do, and then after the lesson, then I explained how maybe I adapted the lesson, how I modified it for students or based on student understanding, and how I altered it throughout the period. And then the intern would also ask me questions. So if she noticed anything that I did and she wasn't sure why I did it, then she could ask about that. So this was a good way for the intern to ask questions about the planning and implementation of a lesson. It was also a good time for the intern to learn student names, classroom procedures, and just basically adjust to our classroom climate. I also had the intern track student participation during discussions and record that data and then share that with me. This was something I probably would not have been able to do on my own. Now, the second strategy that we used was one teach, one assist. For this strategy, one teacher has primary control of the classroom or has primary responsibilities in the classroom, and the other teacher has an assistant role. So we used this again early on in the internship. This was a good way for the intern to get to know the students, provide assistance to students throughout the lesson. The intern took attendance, passed back student work, gave individual assistance to students as she walked around and noticed that they were struggling with something that we were talking about, and worked one-on-one with students, and really it helped her to build relationships with them. She became involved with the students right away, was able to help out with the instruction, help out with managing student behavior, and she was also able to start the class for me if I was doing something else or talking to a student or just whatever else would be happening at the time. It was also something that we used with a student who might come in during that student study hall period, but while I was teaching, then my intern would be able to help that student and answer their questions without me having to stop the class or disrupt the class. This strategy was helpful for the intern as well because it let her focus on the understanding of the students without having to worry about managing the entire class or groups. This was also a good point in the relationship, our co-teaching relationship, to introduce this strategy because it helped us to start collaborating together on the goals of the lesson and the essential understandings that we wanted the students to have. The third strategy that we used was alternative teaching. In this strategy, one teacher has responsibility for the large group of students and the other teacher works with a smaller group of students. So towards the beginning of the internship, I worked with the large group or the main group of students in the classroom while the intern worked with the smaller group. We did this very frequently for students who were absent, while I would be working with the most of the class on review or answering a question that we had left from the day before or going over homework from the previous night. My intern would be working on teaching the essential parts of the lesson to the students who were absent the previous day, helping them get caught up with the rest of the class. We also used this for students who needed extra assistance or intervention, students who did poorly on an assignment, or students who didn't understand a section of a assessment or a test, and so she would work with them to provide some intervention. This was a great time for us to start doing this because we had been collaborating for a while already, and so we both understood how things were taught. We were on the same page with our strategies and our goals for the lessons. This was also good for the intern because she was able to develop some instructional materials and kind of work on her own teaching style with a small group of students. The next strategy that we used was called parallel teaching. In this strategy, the two teachers split the students up into two groups and teach the same lesson to the two groups simultaneously. And we typically did this by taking half of the class down the hallway to an empty classroom. And so I would be in one room teaching and my intern would be in the other room teaching. We had already taught the lesson to a previous class earlier in the day, and so we had both had experience leading various parts of that lesson. We both knew how it went, and we both knew how we wanted that lesson to go because we had planned it and already taught it together. We did this with one class period that we really felt would benefit from having a smaller group size, and we really did feel like the students did have better outcomes. They were able to participate more, and they were able to stay on task better by being in a smaller group with one teacher than being in the large group. Other things that we did, we would split the class based on maybe who had done the homework the night before and then who had not done the homework if there's about an equal group. So one could work on providing intervention that the homework would have provided them with for the students who didn't, and the other one would go over the homework and kind of get at a deeper level for those students who had done that work. This strategy can also be used for providing different manipulatives to different groups or addressing different learning styles, or allowing the two groups to maybe look at a different level of difficulty of an assignment. We also changed up these groups frequently, so it wasn't the same students going to the same place each day. It wasn't the same students with the same teacher each day. At this point in our relationship, we had collaborated so well together. We really knew what we wanted the students to be able to do, and we felt comfortable and confident with each other, knowing that each of us could teach that lesson separately. We got together at the end of the day and discussed how it went in each of our classes, and then we decided what we were going to do for the next lesson based on how those lessons went. Now at this point in the internship, we kind of switched things up a little bit. Instead of just continuing down that list of co-teaching strategies, we reversed it. So we started going backwards, but in this case, the intern took the lead role and I took on the supporting role. So at this point, the intern needed to develop their own unit, their own lessons, and really teach them on their own. This was a requirement by the college. So I took on the role of alternative teaching. I would work with a small group of students who needed intervention. I took on the role of assistant when the intern maybe needed some extra hands in the room, extra eyes to be looking over students' shoulders, helping them out when they needed it, and then observing when she needed a formal evaluation, and I got to sit in the back and observe exactly what happened as the class period went on. So in this case, the intern was making the major decisions about objectives, pacing, and assessment. She was leading the classroom, providing feedback to students, and I was still there. I was still able to provide support if she needed it from me. At this point, I was comfortable letting her take over because I trusted her. I'd seen her teaching small groups. I'd seen her teaching half of the class. She had been assisting me. She knew how things worked in the classroom. She knew my style. I knew her style. And so I was okay sharing that control and authority in the classroom. So after the intern had taken the co-teaching lead, we introduced station teaching. In station teaching, each teacher develops a lesson and teaches a different content to small groups in the class. So one teacher will teach content to a small group, then they'll teach that to another group, then they'll move on and maybe teach it to a third group, while the other teacher is working with the groups that they are not working with. So if you think about just a general station set up in a classroom, you can have 2 stations with 2 teachers and then they switch. You could have 3 stations where students are working individually at a third station and they rotate through. Or what we did, we had 4 stations, and I had planned 2 of them, and the intern had planned the other 2. And so I was working with 2 groups at the same time. They were doing a lot of self-led discovery, where I would be there to answer questions and really take the lead for those 2 stations. So when we used this, we first spent some time brainstorming ideas based on what we had for the goals of the lesson and what we wanted the 4 stations to be. Um, Once we had decided what we wanted the stations to be, we worked individually to seek out resources and think more about those objectives for our assigned stations. So I had 2 stations I was working on, activities, lessons for the students, and the intern had another 2. We met again just to make sure we're on the same page, that we weren't repeating content, that the students were doing different things at each station, and just to make sure that we understood what the other stations were going to be. Then during the lesson, students rotated through the stations in small groups while we provided assistance at our assigned stations. We did this also another time when we had 2 lessons that overlapped. My intern was taking the lead on one project that students were working on in the computer lab. As students finished that project, they came back down to the classroom with me, and I got them started on the second project that I had taken the lead on. So this worked out as a way for us to develop and work on 2 lessons at the same time with groups of students as they were finishing up one lesson. And then students who were taking longer still had the teacher available to work on that first lesson. Again, at this point in the internship, we did trust one another's lesson plans. We were able to create more complex projects, more hands-on lessons, and we did this more frequently than I was able to in my own instruction because there were 2 of us working on it. And the final strategy that we really had been working up to throughout this whole internship was team teaching. In team teaching, both teachers share delivery of the same instruction to the whole student group. And this is what people typically think of when they hear co-teaching. There are 2 teachers working with the whole group of students at the same time. It's typically the most complex relationship, the most complex way of co-teaching, but it's also one of the most beneficial. We really became comfortable with this strategy near the end of the internship because we were comfortable with one another's teaching styles. We were comfortable co-planning together and working together to develop goals of the lessons and facilitating activities. When we first started team teaching, we planned explicitly who would be doing which role during the lesson. So we decided that I would be leading the first activity, and then the intern would lead the questioning, and then I would lead this other part. And so we really assigned roles to one another, but we still kept it open so that each of us could provide clarifying comments to students if we needed to, or we were both walking around assessing students and asking questions while they were working. At this time, we were really able to work comfortably together, and we started not needing to assign those roles to ourselves while we were planning. We planned together, decided what we would do as a team, and then we did it. And we took turns leading whole class discussions or working with individual students. We were also really comfortable to take turns working on all these other strategies as needed. We were switching in and out of the roles of the leader, the assistant, providing intervention. We could improvise. If something happened, then maybe a student needed extra help, then I could go over and work with that student using alternative teaching, and the intern could take over the whole class responsibilities and lead the rest of the class. We were able to do this really smoothly because we, again, knew one another, we trusted each other, we were comfortable with the lessons that we had planned together, and so both of us knew what to do with the whole class, both of us knew what interventions we could provide with the students, and we could recognize when one of us was taking on one of those roles and when one of us needed to step up and continue with the whole group. So those were the 6 strategies that we used throughout the co-teaching experience. We started with low-risk strategies like one teach, one assist, one teach, one observe, that were easy to implement with the intern not having as much familiarity with the classroom, and for myself to feel comfortable sharing that control of the classroom with the intern. Eventually, as our relationship evolved, we knew each other better, and the intern skills developed, we were able to do more complex co-teaching strategies like station teaching and parallel teaching, and eventually moved up into team teaching. So this is the strategies that we used and the way that we use them. I'm sure there are many other ways of implementing these strategies as well, and hopefully you'll find a way to develop them for yourself.